the developments we have in the targeted attacks of these two lawmakers. Of course, we lost Melissa and Mark Hortman over the weekend. We are all pulling for Senator John Hoffman. His wife, Yvette, we understand, was released from the hospital yesterday via Governor Walz. We heard that. And then we do have a new statement from the Hoffman family as well. And then as for the suspect, he is facing both state and federal charges. So the federal case is the one that's going to move forward first. Joining me now is Minnesota's former U.S. Attorney, Andy Luger. Thanks for making the time, Andy. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
You bet. None of us can really imagine what this last week has been like for those of you who knew Melissa and Mark. I guess I don't know your history at all with them. Did you know them? Sure. How well did you know them, if you did?
I did. I knew Melissa and Mark a bit for about 20 years, nowhere near as well as other people who are speaking out on behalf of them. Wonderful people, warm, caring, smart folks who we lost. Obviously, Melissa, an important player in Minnesota public policy for quite a while, but both tremendous people. And it was a tough weekend for all of us.
Yeah. You know, it wasn't that long ago that you would have been the one leading this federal prosecution. So I'm curious how you've been kind of watching all this. Is it been as a prosecutor? Have you had to sort of try to distance yourself personally, because it does hit close to home for those of you in the public eye in these public positions?
Yeah, a little bit of both. I think during the weekend I was following the news about the hunt, knowing, you know, having been on the inside of this multiple times, knowing that there were lawyers at Hennepin County and lawyers at the U.S. Attorney's Office who were putting together papers, search warrant applications, arrest warrant applications, assisting law enforcement, FBI, BCA, and everybody else with the work. So I was sort of, you know, following in my mind what I assumed was happening in terms of the charges that are being prepared, as well as mourning the loss of important, wonderful people.
Yeah, it was such an emotional balancing act for so many people. I'm curious if you can take us a little bit behind the scenes. Obviously, you're not directly part of this investigation, but in your experience, and again, this is unprecedented, again, what we're dealing with right now. In your experience, though, I think one of the things that stood out to a lot of us was so many different agencies having to collaborate here, not stepping on each other's toes, but having it all fit together hand in glove. Can you give us some insight into how something like this comes together and how they were able in law enforcement and others to help get him apprehended safely with no other death?
So a couple things. We have a tradition in Minnesota, and I've been part of that tradition a number of times, of closely working together when tragedy happens. And I'm not going to start naming all of the ones that I've been involved in because this one hits home so close to home. But what would have happened is shortly after the shootings, both the county attorney and the U.S. attorney would have been notified. And they would then, if it was me, I would be on the phone with the head of the BCA, the head of the FBI, police chiefs, and others, as well as being on the phone with my counterparts at the county attorney's office. This is all kind of now protocol for these types of tragedies. I'm sorry to say we've had enough of them. To all make sure we're on the same page, who's doing what, where, when. There's a command center that gets set up, there's an FBI command center, and there's a state command center. And my role, or the role of the U.S. attorney, the role of the county attorney, would be to make sure everybody's coordinating. You would have assistant county attorneys and assistant U.S. attorneys would have come to the office probably in the early morning, maybe even during the night, to begin the process of working on the kinds of subpoenas and search warrants that anybody needs. So there's a whole lot of folks who converge either in the middle of the night or early in the morning to begin the work that has to be done behind the scenes. Law enforcement, probably at the lead of the BCA, would have been all coordinating who's doing what, where, when. Drew Evans, who's the head of the BCA, is an outstanding public servant. The head of the FBI here, the same, and they would be in constant contact based on everything that I've ever done with those folks.
Yeah, it was so assuring for those of us, and they kept the media in the loop, which then kept the public in the loop, and that's not always easy in the middle of all of that. They also are dealing with social media, which is running rampant with misinformation. I remember they had one press conference just almost specifically to dispel some of the misinformation that was happening out there. I can't imagine in this day and age having to navigate all of that on top of the actual investigation that you're working on.
So if you watch some of that footage, one of the things that you'll notice is how calm, cool, and collected everybody was.
Yeah.
Obviously, it was emotional, and certainly for the governor to have to stand up and explain what happened. But for the law enforcement folks, for Drew Evans at the BCA, for the police chief, for the FBI and others to be able to speak to these issues, that kind of calmness, that it comes from, unfortunately, a repetition of this type of tragedy. This one is unique for a number of reasons, but we unfortunately in Minnesota have lived through a number of tragedies, and people have to do their jobs behind the scenes.
Yeah. When it comes to the charges, I think one thing that struck me as I watched the events of the subsequent days when we're hearing from the Hennepin County attorney and then we're hearing from the acting U.S. attorney. So again, to remind people at home, we have the state case, we have the federal case. When Hennepin County attorney Mary Moriarty came out, she didn't give a lot of detail. Really said the investigation piece is sort of ongoing. We've caught him, but now we start this phase, right? The prosecution phase. Didn't give a lot of details. And then almost immediately thereafter, the acting U.S. attorney came out and released, I believe the federal affidavit, I think was the document. And it was just a fire hose of detail. And I thought, I wondered, is that typical for, that much information to come out in the middle, beginning stages of this investigation?
So it is for the following reason. It was my approach, if you look back on some of the cases that when I was the United States Attorney, it was my approach to try to get as much appropriate information out early for the public to be able to digest it. The Wetterling case is one example. The ISIS cases we did, Feeding Our Future, there are a number of cases where people have, in my view, people have a right to know as much as possible without harming the case. So when Joe Thompson comes out with the details that are in the complaint, the federal complaint, that was very much in keeping with what I tried to do. Not everybody agrees with that, and I understand it, but naming the fact that there were 2 other lawmakers who could have been attacked, some of the details of the attack, I appreciate as a citizen knowing as much as I can that's accurate and specific. Not everybody believes that, and there's no right or wrong, but I was not surprised at the way the county attorney did what she did and the acting U.S. attorney did what he did. That's all kind of in keeping with what I expect.
Okay. Just as sort of an aside, but related here, some people have been talking about the fact that the Hennepin County Attorney's Office is under investigation right now by the DOJ for, charging decisions. And I guess the question that I've seen raised is, should the Hennepin County Attorney's Office be in charge of prosecuting this state case? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I get the question, but the answer is they absolutely should. This is their job. Their job is to prosecute murder cases in the state of Minnesota, in Hennepin County, that take place in Minnesota. And the fact that there's a civil rights investigation, not a criminal one, taking place in the Department of Justice. If I was the county attorney, I would not hesitate to go forward with this case. And I don't think, at least in my opinion, I don't think the public should be concerned about that. This is her job. She's doing it.
Okay. When it comes to the federal charges, I just kind of want to bring this down to very sort of simple terms. Why federal charges here in addition to state? We have these 2 parallel cases running. Like, what takes it to that level?
Sure. It's not uncommon to have joint and in tandem investigations and prosecutions. That happens all the time. I could give you a number of specific examples. It's become more common nationally for U.S. attorneys' offices and the Department of Justice to pursue federal charges in important cases. The murder of the United Health president is an example as well. And there are reasons to do it that way. It's more common now than it was perhaps 20, 30 years ago. But the main reason to do it is they're different charges. They require different types of evidence. And you can always have something go wrong in one case or the other. So why not bring both is sort of the attitude that has developed over time. And we, Mary Moriarty, and before her, Mike Freeman and I pursued cases at the same time, always cooperated, everybody got along, and it worked out just for the best of the justice system.
Yeah, that's good to know. So I think one of the things about the current federal charges, as we see the charges right now, one of the charges carries life in prison or the death penalty, which, as you know, is not something we talk a lot about here in Minnesota because we don't have it. So it's intriguing to some people, especially given the emotion involved here. So what should we all know about that even being a possibility here?
Yeah, so the way it works, there are a number of cases where the federal death penalty is an option. In order for the federal death penalty to be put on the table, there's a committee in Washington that meets at the Department of Justice and considers all what we call death penalty eligible cases. That committee will meet. They meet across the country. I mean, this is not just for Minnesota. They have a number of factors that they take into consideration, one of which is uniformity around the country, to try to, do this in a uniform way as much as possible. And that's across administrations. That's not just this administration. And there are experts that have been doing this for a long time. They will then make a recommendation to the Attorney General of the United States, and it'll be her decision ultimately as to whether the death penalty should be in play here.
Also, I wanted to ask you about this suspect's mental capacity, mental state. Could that play into this at all for the defense?
It's always a possibility. I will tell you here, I think it's a tough argument for the defense to make a diminished capacity because there was so much planning, so much forethought, and while that's often an issue and very well could be here, I would bet against it.
Okay. And along those lines, I guess, somebody might ask, well, is there anything that you see right now based on the limited information that you have that would even open the door to the possibility of the defense having room for some sort of bargaining power or plea deal kind of a situation? Is that even, a thing?
Sure, it always is. And here, I would imagine, given that the county is going to pursue first-degree murder charges, which carry life imprisonment, the feds have charges, and they'll go to indictment, I assume, soon, that have life imprisonment and maybe the death penalty. One of, and I don't have any firsthand knowledge of this, but one bargaining chip, for lack of a better term, could be, boy, I'll take life imprisonment as long as I don't have to face the death penalty. And that, that's something that everybody will have to take into consideration. There are a lot of factors in play there. Okay.
I don't want to end this conversation talking about the suspect. So I guess I wanted to ask you what you would want people, politicians, anybody, to do coming out of all of this in a way to sort of honor the memory of Melissa and Mark.
I think we all owe it to ourselves. And I've talked with friends about this since the tragedy. I think we all need to take a step back and think about how we communicate. When I grew up in an era, and I'm older, so I grew up in an era where we didn't have social media, we didn't have the internet. We either spoke face to face, we spoke on the phone. And now we have the ability to, quote unquote, speak without having to actually address anybody directly. And, we talk about political leaders and people in public life and what they should do. But I also think each of us could, and I'm still thinking about it, and I don't have any magic answer, and I don't pretend to, but I think we should all take a look at how we talk about public issues and how we talk about each other. I've traveled the state of Minnesota as the United States Attorney multiple times. People who agree with me, people who disagree with me, we're just people. And for the most part, we're all just trying to do the right thing day in and day out, wherever we fall on the ideological spectrum. And to the extent that we can figure out a way to control social media rather than having it control us, I'd like us to explore that more and take it on ourselves and not just on public officials.
Former United States Attorney Andy Luger, we really appreciate your time during this week. I know it's been a really, really difficult week. Things have come in waves for a lot of people. So thank you for taking the time to help us understand a little bit more about the process and for sharing those thoughts.
Thanks for having me. Have a great day.
Take care.